all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness which creates and animates all things. After years of exploring this awe-inspiring truth on this podcast, I'm super excited to announce that we are now going even deeper down the rabbit hole on the new late-night style consciousness-elevating talk show called Optimistic, which features none other than you, the listeners. Optimistic is taped out of the epic, spaceship-esque 8-bedroom property we call the Mystic Manor that myself and the rest of the Optimistic crew now navigate reality from in Venice Beach, California. And you are invited to come experience a Mystic Manor immersion week with us. During your week-long stay, you'll enjoy unique workshops, chef-prepared meals, one-on-one time coaching and consulting with me, and even co-creating magic with me as a guest on both Optimistic and an episode of the Positive Head podcast. When I started this, my aim with these immersive retreats was to facilitate the ultimate spiritual upgrade and tune-up, so to speak, for our guests while providing them with one of the most memorable experiences of their lives. And I'm happy to say that as of this recording, every guest at the end of their trip so far has told me that they have had a profound and transformational experience at the Mystic Manor and that they definitely want to come back. All that being said, we only have a limited number of spots available between now and next July. And as of this recording, about half of those spots are already filled. So if there's any part of you that is screaming, yes, I want to come, I feel like I need to be there, go now and book a slot with me to discuss how we can put our heads together and make it happen at calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. I know for some people there is also that little voice in their head saying, why not? I can't get off work. I can't afford it, and on and on and on. But, really Henry Ford, I think, said it best. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And I'm confident that where there's a will, there's a way. And I'm personally committed to doing everything in my power, including discounts and payment plans, to get you here if it is something that truly feels like a huge yes for you energetically and like you're meant to be here. Once again, the link to book time to discuss with me is calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. That's spelled calendly.com/talkwithbrandon. All one word, of course. And book in some time and look forward to seeing you soon here at the Mystic Manor. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have Robert Grant here with me on the show. Robert is an accomplished entrepreneur, sculptor, and mathematician who is cracking the code on the ultimate nature of reality. And today he's going to take us deep down the rabbit hole of how his incredible journey has unfolded. Hello there, Robert. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hi. Good to be here with you.
So good to be here with you. Ever since we had the chance to meet up a few weeks back, I've been so looking forward to, meet up in person. I'm so looking forward to actually getting to pick your brain here on the show. You have a lot to share, and we don't have nearly enough episodes to probably contain it all. So I'm going to dive right in really quickly and get as much as we can, cover as much ground as possible during our time today. But I'd like to start with the same question that I always kick the show off with, and it's this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
My passion actually is learning self-love. And that doesn't sound like a very passionate thing, but you know what? I guess maybe in this day and age, with so many people going through significant change, and looking through the external, looking outside of themselves for all the things that people have missed in their lives up until this point. I think the big revelation for me has been to really look internally, and the doorway to that, being able to look internally, has really been acceptance and self-love.
I love that, because listeners are probably all smiling out there, because you're not aware of it. But one of the things I say, I don't know, I've probably said at least 100 times on the show over the years, is the number one thing I believe we're all here to do is learn self-love. And that, we have very, varying paths, to be sure. But that is one that is at the core for all of us, I believe, because, the way I see it is, well, we're one with the source that creates and animates all things, and it is one. And so it is all a game of self-love. At the end of the day, when, all the chess pieces go back in the box, what we learn is this is a story of source falling in love with itself. And as fractals of the source, we are of course learning that lesson on a small scale, so to speak, as human beings. And so getting that piece right, everything stems from that self-love piece, if you will.
I could not agree more. And it's interesting, we tend to spend most of our lifetimes looking outside of ourselves, and even we're told, we are led to believe. And I don't think it's nefarious. I just think it's part of the whole process. But we're led to believe that self-love is bad. In fact, we give it names like narcissism, et cetera. But actually, I would propose to you, and I'm sure you probably agree with this, that true self-love and acceptance is not narcissism. In fact, narcissism is the opposite of that. Narcissism is when you love only the reflection of yourself that you want to show the rest of the world. And in fact, you're very much unaccepting of all of the faults and mistakes and all of the flaws that we all have in our personalities and character, and we tend to dwell on those things, or we completely are in denial of those things. When you're so in denial of those things and so unwilling to integrate them as part of who you are, that is what we probably would define as narcissism. It's falling in love with the reflection in the mirror. It's not falling in love with the person in the mirror.
Right. Yeah. It's, I call it the good kind of selfish, or selfless selfishness. When you realize that, like Gandhi said, if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others. And I always like to add to that, why does that hold true? Because there are no others. So when you are, understanding, hold on, like, if I love someone else, yes, I'm totally loving myself, and that's how that energy comes back around. And the only way you can even get there is by having enough for your cup to overflow to begin with. So it's super paramount that we get this piece and we realize how beautiful we are, and to fall in love with ourselves, and of course everyone's showing up as a reflection of how you feel about yourself. It's like, if you want to have a life that's really fulfilling, it's ground zero.
I like how you put that, that everyone is a reflection of how you feel about yourself. The way I put that is that, I tend to think of myself and I guess everybody has their own identification of who they are. And it's probably one that starts from this place of separation right after we're born. And we have probably a degree of separation anxiety from our mothers, et cetera. And then we go through life. And actually what we're doing is we're getting farther and farther from the other half of ourselves. We're just polarizing ourselves until we get to midlife.
Right.
And I think that, the way I think it hit me one day when I was like, wait a minute, it's not the universe that's around me, it's the you inverse.
Yes.
So you could say that everything around us can only be seen through the prism of your own perception and your own judgment and observation. And as such, then the entire world around you is really just a reflection of your own subconscious thought, your subconscious mind.
Right.
And how you perceive that then is obviously associated with what experience is and how you perceive yourself. And so, I often would would think to myself, well, wait a minute, I think the things that I'm attracting are the things that I've been judging. And then I started noticing that I would attract those same things until I no longer judge the things I was attracting.
Right. Yeah, that's a really powerful place to be at when you start realizing it's that close to home.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to hear, I think it really important in your case to get a little bit of, or as much as you feel called to share regarding your backstory, because you have such a fascinating story, and how you got to where you are, and just this very unique trajectory path that you're on.
I like to joke because a lot of my friends are like, wait a minute, how did this happen? How did you end up getting into mathematics and to philosophy and sculpture and art? And you started out in kind of the world as a pharmaceutical executive. I was a pharma CEO. And most people don't think about, being a pharma CEO as being a place that you would sort of find yourself in.
Right.
And I often joke and I say, well, I just couldn't be evil anymore.
Right.
And
funny.
people, that always tends to get at least some people laughing. But,
right.
It's I say it in jest, but there's probably some truth to it. And I don't think that the pharmaceutical industry, and being from the pharmaceutical industry and healthcare as an entrepreneur, I can tell you that I don't think that the individuals are necessarily evil as they are often portrayed in mainstream media. However, I do think that the system is fundamentally flawed. And I do think that the system in the pharmaceutical industry tends to lead to perverse incentives and unfortunately untoward outcomes from time to time. But I've never seen it as sort of like, you don't ever talk to anybody in the pharmaceutical industry and have them say, oh, you know what, I joined this industry because I wanted to price gouge or I wanted to hurt people. In fact, it's quite the opposite. People in the pharmaceutical industry would say, I joined the industry because I wanted to help people.
Right.
And it's interesting that it's become such a, sort of perverse reflection, I guess, in the way that the world has seen it. But I spent, 25 years of my career in the healthcare industry. And I was one of those people that chose healthcare because I wanted to be able to, in some way, shape, or form, help. And I didn't want to go and be a doctor. Although I was always interested in biology and chemistry and the natural sciences, and I was fascinated by it. But I realized that I didn't really want to be pigeonholed into one specialty. And if you're going to be a doctor, you really have to micro-specialize, right? It's like our whole system in Western education, and probably arguably global education today, is based on how do I drive higher and higher degrees of scarcity of perception on what it is that I'm doing. Right. So that I'm the only person that does what I do, and maybe only a handful of others do it, even tangentially in a similar way.
Right.
And so I can command more for my time.
Right.
And so you're taught very early on, from high school into undergraduate at college, and then into, medical school, or whether you choose law school or MBA school, as I did. I chose MBA school. You're sort of pushed into micro specialization very early. And that is so that it's easier to find a job.
Right.
It's a practical matter, right? But it's kind of like, how do you take, business is all about this concept of buy low, sell high. Right? How do I buy something for very little and sell it for a lot? And the way that it is done, and it has been done for thousands of years now, is to create an illusion of scarcity around whatever it is that you are selling. Because the more you can make people believe that it's scarce, there's not more of it, right? And I guess the only thing that you could argue that would be something like land on Earth. They're not making more land on Earth, but there's land reclamation all the time from oceans and stuff like that. But if you take something like water, the most abundant resource on the planet, in fact, we have a closed loop system, right? It is impossible to lose water off of the planet right now. So And every time we drink water and you go to the bathroom, it just basically recirculates itself and it ends up evaporating, going up, and we have our own clean water system, right? Which is the whole precipitation process that we have.
Right.
And it's amazing that all someone had to do was to put water in a plastic bottle to make everybody believe that it's like this, precious resource that is going to be lost and gone. And, never mind the fact that scientists have just come up and found that there is enough water underneath the Earth's outer plates that would make up another four times the amount of Earth on this, 4 times the amount of water on the surface of the Earth.
Wow.
Right? All the oceans combined.
4 times.
4 times.
Wow.
It's pretty incredible. And for those that would say, yeah, but that's salinated water versus fresh water. Well, the truth is that, again, you have water evaporate, it goes up. I've been on a aircraft carrier before where they make 50 million gallons of fresh water every day from seawater.
Yeah.
And they just evaporate the water, and I mean the water tastes fabulous on these aircraft carriers. So again, there's this falsehood of this illusion of scarcity. And if it's not the aggregate amount of water, it's going to be the cleanliness of water.
Right.
But actually, we have the means to clean water. I mean, yes. I know a young man who's only 18 years old who used carbon technology, graphene, to be able to create clean water, with a bucket. And you could take it anywhere on the planet, and you could take literally kind of sewer, nasty water. And with this filtration system that he innovated at only 18 years old,
wow,
it literally cleans water and makes it totally drinkable.
Wow.
And quite tasty, in fact. So it's pretty incredible to me how much of the world has been driven by this notion of scarcity. Well, what are the other things that we use to sort of qualify and measure scarcity? Well, time is one of them.
Huge
we have units of time. We have dollars, right, which are units also that generally associate with time, because a dollar is a unit of monetary sort of compensation that would be associated with how much time it takes to perform a certain task, right?
Right.
And all of this is pushing us in this world towards greater and greater degrees of specialization, which is sort of right back from Adam Smith economics, right? Which is that in both macro and microeconomical terms, you want to have people that are expert in doing one or two things, be those things, and then provide a trade mechanism for a market dynamic so that people can do that. Well, that has been very much true, and it has been the paradigm for business for the past several thousand years.
Right.
It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, I could find a rock in my backyard. If I could make everybody believe that rock was something special, and that rock was very rare and could never be found again, I could sell it for a higher amount of money.
Sure.
And this is the concept of capitalism. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm certainly not of the mindset that, there's a better system today that's available to us. There may yet be in the future. And I'm certainly no communist from that perspective. But at the same time, I see the pervasive impact that scarcity is a concept, which, by the way, a concept I don't believe in, because I don't believe anything is truly scarce. I think it's purely our perception that drives that degree of scarcity.
Agreed.
And I think that, when you combine that with the fact that what we were talking about earlier, that people, it's not that people don't like each other in this world necessarily that causes all the wars and strife and difficulty and pain and suffering. It's generally that people don't like themselves. So you combine the fact that people don't like themselves, a lot of self-loathing, narcissism, and then combine that with scarcity and fear of running out of whatever it is that you want to hold on to, then you've got kind of a world that we live in today.
Yep.
And that's kind of where we are. So for me, about 7 years ago, I decided that I couldn't do it anymore. And I could not be, the pharmaceutical executive CEO anymore. And I decided at that point to start my own group of companies. And I founded this group of companies that was going to be built on this notion of eradicating this illusion of scarcity, right? And so we operate in several different fields, energy, or clean energy in particular, as well as healthcare, fintech, and now the security field. And I've really enjoyed my career. I love my career. It gives me a way to have creative outlet. We have fantastic managers and CEOs that run each of our businesses. And that frees me up to be able to pursue other things. And since the 1990s, I worked in the electromagnetism field and laser technology. I previously worked for a company called Coherent, which is based up in the Bay Area. And I had this dream at that time in 1999, in fact, that one day we'd be able to play DNA like keys on a piano keyboard, that there was something more embedded within our DNA that could unlock greater potential for the human experience and the human condition and human empowerment. And so I have always been fixated on that as a concept. And in that process, I got involved in a lot of different physics and energy related concepts. And I kind of was lucky enough to rub shoulders with some of the top physicists and other mathematicians in the world. And in that process, I was searching for a prime number pattern that could help make sense of gravity and electromagnetism in trying to solve things like gravitational control, as well as time and energy, and breaking, second law of thermodynamics and, energy cannot be created nor destroyed concepts to create, a new paradigm of energy that might be able to bring in a new paradigm of abundance, right? Away from this concept of scarcity. Right. But maybe there's energy all around us that's latent in space itself. And so in that context, I started looking for a pattern. And normally what happens is you have, physics tends to be a field that starts off in the following way. You'll have if you have a very broad thinking physicist, he or she may come up with a very large cosmological kind of theory, right? Mm-hmm. And then they have to back it with physics and then kind of tend to go into geometry, some math equations, and then they go into experimentation and they kind of stop the theoretical side of it with the equations as well as the geometry. Mm-hmm. And what our team does, and we have about 12 of us that work in this way with physicists and mathematicians on our team, is we start from the number theory side. So we start from number theory because we're operating on the basis that the entire universe is based on numbers, and that if there is a language of the universe itself, it would be a numerical language. Right. And in this context, I started noticing patterns that I had never come to learn in any university or school setting. And then not long thereafter, I discovered the first prime prediction pattern through discovery of a new type of number that's non-prime called quasi-prime. It has characteristics like a prime number, but is not actually prime. And by arranging numbers on a 24 spiral, so if you imagine like one turn of the spiral would have 24 points around it, positional points, and then the next turn would take it to 48, and the next turn would take it to 72, just like hours in a day. Uh-huh. A prime pattern, and from that was able to predict primes infinitely. So that then changed my life forever, because I was, up until that point, a pharmaceutical and healthcare executive and private equity, venture capitalist type of a person. And overnight, that kind of shifted the trajectory of what I was doing in my career and what I was spending my time on. Because from that point forward, I really started to dedicate a lot more time and effort into pulling on the string a little further to understand maybe some of the big questions that we haven't been able to answer. If the prime pattern and prime prediction hadn't been answered for several thousands of years, what other things now with this knowledge could we use to answer? Right. And maybe tackle these bigger questions around changing the paradigm of a scarcity into one of abundance.
So what I find absolutely fascinating about your story, from when we discussed previously, is sort of your trajectory that you just kind of loosely touched on here. Being a CEO of a very well-known large pharmaceutical company, and this kind of was, came out of nowhere for you, correct? I mean, you had a pretty profound story that you shared with me that sort of led to an opening, and I would love, as much of that as you care to share. Sure. I feel like it's just fascinating going from, it's such a great example of someone who I think has hit a certain point in their life path on one very unique, strong, powerful path, and then the universe sort of picking up and dropping on a totally different path. And these guys, on the show are very used to hearing stories of, synchronicity and things that are well outside the box, and yours definitely qualifies. So as much as that you'd care to share, Robert, I would love to give that background.
Sure. So I was actually, I did the advanced management course at Harvard Business School, which is conducted with this organization called YPO. And so I have a lot of professors at Harvard Business School who are outstanding. And I wanted to put together for some of the people that were members of a cooperative group that I created back in 2012. I wanted to give them the similar experience that I had in going to Harvard Business School and for postgraduate studies. And it was a fantastic experience for me. So I put together this whole curriculum, and we were at Harvard Business School, and my partner and I were setting up a new company that was an investment bank. So one of the companies in our portfolio at one time was an investment bank, an investment banking entity. And in order to, do the filing for investment banks since the financial crisis in the late, 2009, 2010 timeframe, all the laws changed on what the requirements were.
Right.
And so, they have these new guidelines with FINRA. They're no longer new today, but they were new at that time. And as part of it, you had to get fingerprints taken and all that kind of stuff just to register a new entity with FINRA. And so we were kind of coming up against a deadline. It was kind of our own internal deadline, and we needed to fill out this paperwork and get our registration in with the not only with FINRA but also different regulatory bodies that the government basically coordinates with. Both state and federal. And so one of the things we had to do is get our fingerprints taken. And it happened that we were going to be at Harvard, and so we arranged for a clerk, a notary, to come to Harvard Business School and take us out of the classroom environment and get our fingerprints, and we'd go about our merry business and go back in the classroom, and then we could file all of our paperwork. Well, while I was there, I was getting my fingerprints taken, and this fellow who was an older gentleman, and he asked me a very bizarre question. He said, I brought you some photographs today. Would you like to see them? And I mean, I've had my fingerprints taken several times for different work. Luckily, I've never been arrested or anything, so I haven't had it for that reason. But he said, I brought you some photographs, and I'd like you to see them. Would you like to see them? And I said, well, sure. And he shows me these photographs, and he starts explaining to me that his job as a clerk is only a part-time gig, as a notary, and that he only does the job so that he can meet the people he's supposed to meet. And so I thought, that's an interesting, kind of bizarre comment.
Yeah.
And he hands me 10 photographs from the 1930s and 40s. And I kind of, rifle through them really quickly, and I stop on one of them, and I seem to recognize it, but I couldn't place where. Yeah. I've always had a very good kind of photographic memory. I can see things like, I remember when I learned the Korean language, I literally still to this day have the pages like memorized in my mind.
Wow.
And I learned Korean 30 years ago. I know, on page 88 at the top of the page, the upper right.
Wow.
So I have this kind of bizarre memory association, which is not so great in many respects, because my wife will tell me things, and I have to remind her that my memory is not very audible. So, so I'm not so good with remembering what I'm told, but I'm quite good at remembering what I see.
I gotcha.
So basically, he hands me this photo, and it was a photo of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, giving a speech at a campaign rally for a mayoral candidate in Boston in 1942. And I told him, I said, "This looks familiar to me. I don't know where I've seen this before, but I've seen it before." And he looked at me and he said, "Keep the photo. It's for you." So
now, this is a complete stranger who's just taking your fingerprint. This process you need to go through for legal filings, and he's just to make sure everyone's following. And he says, "Hey, good to see you. I brought you some photos, and I take this job just so I can meet the people I'm meant to meet." I mean, wild.
Yeah, it's exactly how it went down, and it was strange because I took the photo and I didn't really think much about it. I said, "Well, thank you." I didn't really question him much about it, and so I went back to the classroom where my notebook was still open, and we were watching a professor give a great presentation, and her name is Frances Frye. She's one of the top professors at Harvard Business School, and she teaches a very boring subject, which is production operation management, but she teaches it with such incredible alacrity and passion that you got to literally use all your faculties to stay up with her. She's very fast.
Yeah.
And she'll call you out if you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
And she'd been my professor before, so I knew her well. And of course, since I'm hosting the group, there were about 40 people there. And since I'm hosting the group, she notices that I'm not taking notes on what she's presenting. And she says, "What are you doing?" And I had already gotten through about 20 or 30 pages. No sooner did I sat down at the desk that I had been occupying. And all of a sudden, I started writing all this complex math and physics. It was the most bizarre thing. I never associated for several months that it might have anything whatsoever to do with, this photograph that I was given. In fact, I didn't even think the two things were related at all.
Yeah.
I had no reason to think they might be related.
Yeah.
And but from that moment forward, I have now drawn probably, I don't know, more than 10,000 images in notes. I have very detailed notebooks. I've filed several patents on this in the field of math and electromagnetism and even things like 3D and 4D printing of matter and stuff like this.
And this just all started soon after this event with the picture. This just started, the math just started coming through you, kind of like a memory sort of thing.
It was like a
download,
like a memory. It was the most bizarre thing. So, and I haven't stopped. That was in 2014, and at first I would do it really like when I was in that classroom or when I was flying on a plane to Europe or something, and the people sitting next to me would be like, "What in the heck are you doing?"
Yeah.
And I'm just having a ball, just diving deep into very complex physics, and
that you'd never studied.
That I had never. I mean, I had a rudimentary understanding of physics. I'd always been interested in it, and of course, I studied. I was a finance major when I was at MBA school, but obviously, you have to be okay at math.
Yeah, right.
But it wasn't like my passion.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, this became a real passion for me, and it was really mixed with a lot of philosophical, undertones and overtones. A few months prior to that, in fact, I was about a year or so prior to that, I was on a trip in Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. And I met one of the people that had been the country manager. This is when I was previously at Bausch and Lomb. Mm-hmm. So I guess it would have been more like around 2 years before.
And most of you guys out there probably heard of Bausch and Lomb. You were the CEO of Bausch and Lomb?
I was the CEO of Bausch and Lomb Surgical, yes.
Yeah.
Wow. And so basically I was in Hong Kong, and we had this country manager who had just come back, and he was the country manager of Thailand. And everyone was saying that the guy was a super dynamic leader, very successful when he'd been working in the company before, but he was on a 5-year sabbatical. And I said, 5-year sabbatical? How does someone do a 5-year sabbatical and then come back and be a country manager of an operation that had probably 200, 300 people in it?
Right.
And come to find out, this particular fellow was not only out for 5 years, he was at a monastery for 5 years.
Wow.
As a Buddhist monk, and he took a vow of silence for 4 years of the 5.
Wow.
So he hasn't even spoken to anybody, right, for like 4 years. And we're having lunch as an entire group, and I was about to give a presentation. And so I started talking to him in the lunch line, which was a salad bar type thing.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to be one of the first people to talk to him.
Yeah, right.
Because, I mean, here he had 4 years, vow of silence. You know, what's he going to say, right?
Sure.
It's got to be something really profound. And sure enough, he didn't disappoint me, because I asked him, what do you think about, the time that you're away? What did you learn? And he said, very simply, he says, there is no duality. So this was, a few years before I had the picture situation, and I started, drawing out all this math and physics. And he said, there is no duality. And he said nothing else. And I felt really compelled to find out more, but we didn't really get to finish our conversation except for one other sentence. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, there is no good versus evil. There's only perception. And I remember flying home on the plane back to LA from Hong Kong and drawing in my notebook these concepts that would be considered dualistic, right? So, take a word and then whatever the word is, put it on one side and then put the other word that would be its antonym on another side, left to right.
Right.
So I started with like Democrat, Republican.
Sure.
Why not? I'm an independent. And so I started thinking, well, if I push the extreme of Democrat to the left, then I end up with communism. If I push the extreme of Republican to the right, then I end up with fascism. But then I noticed, could I think of any examples of fascist, dictators or communist sort of leaders? And the only ones I could think of that were contemporary were people like Kim Jong-un, who would be a self-declared communist, and yet it is impossible to differentiate between a communist leader like Kim Jong-un and a fascist dictator, because they manifest very similarly.
Right.
They look the same. So then I started noticing it wasn't just in that regard. From a geopolitical or a political science perspective, I noticed it in many things. I took words like humility versus arrogance. And I noticed that, I started thinking about examples of people that I knew that, usually the people that say that somebody else is so arrogant are the most arrogant people.
Right.
Right? Because there's this old saying, right? If you spot it, that means you got it.
Yeah, right.
And so I started noticing that everything was just a step away, to the farther extreme from the extreme on the other side. And so maybe it's not a linear line, but rather circular. Right. And so I started noticing that, hey, even with arrogance, humility, I know people that are so pious in their humility that they become arrogant in their humility.
Right.
And this is something that I started really thinking. I'm like, okay, is it therefore this concept of non-duality, is it just a term that someone would say that's like wanting to show that they're into Buddhistic thought, or is it really something? How do you live in a world without the potential for good and evil when we see so many bad acts around the world, right?
Right.
And so I started grappling with these really, really tough to answer questions. And I think that the timing of meeting that fellow at Harvard Business School, the clerk, the notary, was perfectly timed for when after I'd been thinking about these kind of notions for a long time, a couple of years at that point, it just came at exactly the right time. And so for me, it became a catalyst for dramatic change, which then also culminated in, kind of the dark night of the soul that a lot of people experience as well, where you experience betrayal. And, one of the things that you said earlier in this conversation is that the fundamental reason why we are here, right, is to learn self-acceptance and love.
Right.
And I could not agree with that more. But one of the final things to learn is true compassion and unconditional love. And therefore, right, as I said earlier, you attract the things that you judge until you no longer judge the things you attract.
Right.
Therefore, for me, I started noticing that unconditional love, right, as opposed to conditional love sounds pretty innocuous. It's like, okay, I love you. It's like a fair weather fan.
Right? Yeah, right.
But actually, a fair weather fan is in the exact same continuum as betrayal itself. And so if you love yourself conditionally, then you will be inundated in your life at some point with betrayal. And the reason is so that you will learn unconditional love. Right? Again, you attract the things you judge until you no longer judge the things you attract.
Right.
And so I experienced that like so many others do and have. And that really pushed me to go really deep internal, because I truly believe that the big answers to the biggest and most challenging and vexing of questions are not found external to your person. They're found inside your soul. They're found inside you.
Absolutely. So as this journey unfolded for you, do you care to share what sort of unfolded with this photo that was given to you a bit later?
Yeah, maybe we can come back to it if you like. But basically, I started filing patents on the work, and I didn't really know, if anyone else had kind of had these thoughts or because if other people have had the thoughts that are similar to you, then you can't really file patents on it. And it wasn't that I was trying to file patents so I could, make a lot of money and make it scarce. You almost have to, in today's world, file patents so that you can protect it, so that others wouldn't make it scarce and not allow it to come to light. I think one of the things that you find is that inventors and entrepreneurs, they almost never start their businesses to make money. Now, that's going to sound extremely foreign to people that have not been on that side of it before.
Yeah, right.
And it's funny because, you look at, there's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever read the book by Ayn Rand called Atlas Shrugged. So you have kind of creators in the world, and everybody has the capacity to create. But most people choose, not to necessarily. And the people that are more transfer agents are always looking to find a way to maximize value for themselves in the transfer of, an asset. They create a market, and they become the brokers in that market, in other words.
Yep.
But the founders are not people that generally start companies to make a lot of money. There are some exceptions, of course, just as everything in life has exceptions. But by and large, the entrepreneurs that I have known have always wanted to do something good.
Yeah.
They wanted to have a positive impact. It doesn't always end up that way because sometimes, you have unintended consequences.
Sure.
And the less you are accepting of yourself, the more those unintended consequences tend to kind of hit you with a vengeance. And then you get perverse incentives, and then all of a sudden you meet the CEO or an entrepreneur who says, I never intended it for to be like this, right?
Yep.
Like, I built this business and I didn't, like Mark Zuckerberg even.
Yeah. I'm
sure he probably went into it thinking, I'm creating this really cool social platform for people to strengthen their bonds with other people.
Right.
Now it's like, whole revolutions and human rights and everything can be adjudicated in the court of public and global public opinion, which has never been able to be done before. The whole, the Arab Spring that happened several years ago would never have happened if not for Facebook.
Sure.
And you can kind of list so many positive things that have happened as a result of our higher degree of connectivity as human beings. Even today on social media, I am communicating with people all over the world that, are interested in math and physics and art. And I never would have known these people. I have people that follow me in Iran. I never would have ever communicated with them. So from that perspective, I'm so grateful. But the fact that now we live in a, almost V for Vendetta society.
Right.
That is a dystopian sort of caricature of what we would have been thinking in 1984, right? And thinking about an Orwellian dystopian future. That's kind of what we're living in right now. I mean, Just now I had to sit there and look at my phone because I said a word that my phone recognized because it's listening to me all the time.
Right.
And Siri wanted to have a say-so.
Right.
And in fact, just because I said that name just now, it just popped up again.
Wow.
So the point is that you can't differentiate. They're listening to you all the time.
Yeah.
We are talking amongst ourselves about, something that's so bizarre, right? A new kind of popcorn or whatever. And just because we're talking about it amongst our friends and people's phones are listening, the next time you go onto your Google, or on social media, the next pop-up ad that shows up is for this particular type of popcorn that you guys are talking about.
Totally.
And that's just some messed up stuff, right? It's like,
yeah, it is.
we live in a surveillance society today.
For sure.
And so, but when you talk to entrepreneurs, generally they want to do things to help the world. They're not thinking about, just like Elon Musk, he released all of his patents so that everybody, he's like, look, if you guys want to copy me, go right ahead. I'm not going to sue you, right? But you have to file patents in order to do that.
Yep.
And again, that's one of the things that people that judge people in industry that maybe have never had that experience before, they don't really know. And they would do well to get educated on it. Because the same is true, and like I said, in the pharmaceutical industry and the banking industry, the individuals aren't evil. That's just not the way it goes. But there are incentives to drive greater and greater scarcity and more specialization and higher profits. That is a fact. That is an absolute fact and reality that we're never going to, at least in this paradigm, going to escape from.
Yeah.
But, for me, I started finding out whether or not some of the work that I'd come up with was potentially patentable.
Yeah.
And so I had one of our research team members do some prior art searches, and he found only one reference to someone from the 1930s and 40s, actually, strangely. And he looked through the last couple of hundred years, and the work that was shown to me, it was bizarre because it matched so much of my work. And it was by a fellow by the name of Walter Russell. And so I immediately looked at it and I was like, wow, that is really strange, because something about it really resonated deeply.
Yeah.
And so I went and bought all of his books and everything. And then my wife and I went on a trip to New York. And while we were in New York, we were like, oh, let's go to this library. He had a university. He had actually come to where we live in Laguna Beach. And in the 1940s. And he was this really interesting fellow. So I got to learn the life of this person.
He worked with Tesla, is that right?
Yeah, he was one of Tesla's partners. In fact, and strangely enough, his office when he worked at Westinghouse with Tesla was my office in New York. That I'd already had that office for 4 years before I even
Wow. That's pretty interesting. So the guy who had patented the same stuff that was just coming through to you in a download basically was had the same office that you'd already been at. All these many, 60 years later or whatever.
Yeah. There were so many things. In fact, his first element on his periodic table of elements was called Alphanon. And I had a company that I'd founded 4 years before called Alpheon.
Wow.
And, there were just so many bizarre things like that. So I can't really answer why these things happen. And I think all of us have probably had experiences that, we can't exactly empirically, or we can't exactly articulate the reasons why things happen. We just know that sometimes they happen and they're inexplicable. We just don't know.
I mean, some would consider, there's one other piece to this, if I recall, the picture, right? Isn't there?
Yeah. So the picture was interesting because my friend Matt, who did this work, he's now CEO of one of our companies, but he said, "Oh, I found this picture of Walter, and he has his hand in his pocket of his suit jacket, and in the same way that I always had." And he was like making fun of me. He's like, "Oh, here you are again," right? Type of thing. And it was
like
really
joking,
funny.
like you're the reincarnation of him or something.
Yes, yeah. Like he was like, dude. He immediately was the one that called it out. I wasn't, ready to say
go there.
That.
Right? Yeah.
I'm not sure that I would be at all, but
right.
Or today even, but he sent me this picture, and it was a picture of Walter Russell, a different angle, a side view, and he was standing there at this same mayoral candidate sort of stump speech where Franklin Delano Roosevelt is standing next to him, giving also a speech.
Wow. So your friend sent you a picture, and it ends up being Walter Russell, who happened to be at that same speech that this fingerprint guy had given you all these years earlier, saying was relevant to you.
That's correct.
And it was Walter Russell that happened to be at that little speech.
That's right.
Wow. Was Walter actually in the picture that you took? He's somewhere in the crowd, or
no? He was off to the side.
Okay, got you.
It turns out that Walter was the family sculptor of the Roosevelt family. So he did a lot of artwork, both paintings and sculptures.
Interesting. You sculpt too, right?
Yes, I do. From the time of Teddy.
Things that make you go,
Yeah. Well, that's all they can do, because who knows if it's
such things.
I do believe it's possible. I do believe it's possible to channel.
Right.
And you just don't know, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
right.
Anyway, the point is that he worked very closely with Franklin Roosevelt, and he was the sculptor for the White House. And he's probably very well known as well. He's mainly known. It's funny because in letters between he and Tesla, there's a lot of commentary about how Walter is actually a scientist that the world knows as a top artist, and that Tesla is an artist that the world knows as a top scientist.
Wow. But
they were both for sure polymaths.
Wow.
And Walter Russell for sure. A very accomplished. He never went to school. I think he dropped out of school when he was like in his early single digits of age, and yet he was accomplished pianist. He was a composer. He was an architect. He designed several buildings in New York City. He is one of the co-founders of the Twilight Club, which claimed members that included the likes of Ralph Waldo Emerson, Tom Watson, founder of IBM. J.P. Morgan, right? All these guys ran around together, and he was the president of this society also.
Wow!
Not only the Twilight Club, but also the Art and Sciences Society in New York. So he was a very unique individual, and he left behind hundreds, if not thousands on thousands, of drawings and sketches.
Wow!
That are very advanced physics. But he left out mathematics. He only made 3 references to mathematics in all of his works. The 3 references to math that he gave were as follows: doubling math, which are binary expansions, so 2 to the power of x. So 2 to the second, 2 to the third, 2 to the fourth, 2 to the fifth, 2 to the sixth, which creates this pattern that repeats of 1 doubles 2, so 1, 2, then 4, 4 doubles to 8, 8, 16, 32, right? 64, 128, 256, just like computers do, right? In binary doubling expansions. The other thing that he does is he makes a correlation between music and numbers, and he says that our number system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a still point at the center, and then it goes 4, 3, 2, 1. Right, so they're like musical notes.
Wow.
And the middle of the scale would be like an F sharp, right?
Yeah.
And then the third reference that he made is really about geometry. And he has one picture on crystallography, which has 24 points on it, which I only noticed oh gosh, probably only about a month ago, that it had 24 points on it, which was fundamental to the discovery I'd made on prime numbers.
You mentioned earlier the 20. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, he never mentioned anything about prime numbers. He never mentioned anything at all in his works other than what I just mentioned to you about mathematics. Just those three concepts, that geometry was based on this 24-point polygon, and then complexity, that's sort of like a fulcrum point for polygonal geometry and polyhedral geometry. And then this wave expansions of doubling, binary expansion math. And then musical notes and their association with musical notes. So those were his only references to mathematics, but he left very, very detailed drawings and sketches on physics. And he wrote a book that is probably the best book you could find on this subject of light. And it's called The Secret of Light. And it's a fascinating book. I highly recommend it to anybody who's interested in learning more about Walter Russell. Often referred to as the Leonardo da Vinci of the 20th century.
Interesting. Wow. And now you have part of your own discovery ties into the Vitruvian Man, speaking of Da Vinci and everything. Maybe this would be a good time to segue into some of that.
Sure. It's funny. Actually, you're going to get you'll be the first to hear this. But for some time now, I had believed that I've always been a fan of Da Vinci. I've always been fascinated by his work. I was at the Vatican in May, and I bought a book called the Codice Atlantico, which is a book of all of the hand sketches in the notebook of Leonardo da Vinci. And it was, all these works, including the Mona Lisa, were taken in the last 3 years of Da Vinci's life to a place called Amboise, France, which is where the king of France, who was Francis I at the time, this is at the same time as Henry VIII, is king of England. And in 1516, Francis I takes over the city of Milan, which is where the Last Supper, the famous Last Supper painting, fresco, was made by Da Vinci. And there's only 20 some odd pieces of artistic works left behind by Da Vinci that are painted, right? So there's not that many, and yet they are all priceless, right? They're all priceless. And one of those such works recently sold at auction, the Salvator Mundi, for $450 million.
Wow.
So that was the most expensive painting ever taken to auction. And this painting ended up in the hands at a garage sale in New Orleans. And it had been painted over. And it's a fascinating story if you're interested to learn about it. You can find a video about it on YouTube. And Sotheby's then, authenticated it, and it was controversial, but it's definitely a Da Vinci.
Wow. And
they restored it. It's an amazing story. So literally some guy bought it for, the equivalent of, next to nothing.
Wow.
And then was able to sell it at $450 million.
Incredible.
Now that's pretty amazing. But so what was happening at the time, you got to go back in time, right the year after Da Vinci was born. The city of Constantinople, which at that time had been, all the way through the Dark Ages, and from the Holy Roman Empire, which became, right after Constantine, it became this religious, almost theocratic, theocracy type government system that Emperor Constantine put in place because they were having a hard time keeping the Roman Empire together. They were solidly in their decline, and they're like, "What are we going to do? We got all these Christians now, so I guess if we can't beat them, let's join them," type of thing. So they came up with the Council of Nicaea, which was in 325 AD, and they canonized the Bible, and they get all of the bishops of the seven churches in, including Ephesus and Antioch and all these places in Asia Minor, which is Turkey today. And they kind of, with time, established two centers for the Roman Catholic Church. There was the one that was established in Rome, and then the other one was established in Constantinople. Well, in 1453, so the year after Da Vinci was born in 1452, Constantinople was taken over in a battle, and as such, a lot of the works, this is when it became Istanbul, effectively, and a lot of the works were then experiencing a diaspora of sorts across Europe, and so this created an impetus and catalyst, because a lot of ancient works that had been hidden, maybe stuff that had been in the Library of Alexandria that had been somehow saved and made it to this library in Constantinople, ended up getting released. A lot of ancient Greek texts, from the likes of Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, etc., ended up making it out around the world. And that became the impetus for the Renaissance, which really had its heart in the whole area of, in its beginning, in Tuscany, but it was something that extended all the way around Europe at the time. There was clearly a Renaissance and an Enlightenment. People were interested in different things, and they were interested in polymathing in particular. And they, to be the ideal person at the time meant you had to be well-rounded. You couldn't just be an artist. You had to be, you had to have an understanding of mathematics and an understanding of philosophy as well, and rhetoric. And that's kind of what the day was about at that time. Well, Leonardo da Vinci obviously would have been, as growing up during that period of time, gaining access to things that no one had gotten access to before.
Sure.
Prior to the fall of Constantinople, was a leader in that Enlightenment, right, without a doubt. But he had contemporaries also that lived in a similar time frame, whether it's Raphael or Luca Pacioli, who is also a mathematician. Another person that we know today that is very well known is in political science circles is Niccolo Machiavelli, which you probably heard of, a book that he wrote called The Prince. And these were all contemporaries of Leonardo da Vinci, as was Michelangelo, right? And there were certain rivalries that would show up amongst them too. But think about all these great artists, right? I just named a few that were bumping shoulders with each other all in the same time frame, right? It's kind of like, you think about another Enlightenment period happened at the end of the 19th century with the Impressionist artists, right? So you've got Degas, you've got Cézanne, you've got Monet, Renoir. You can kind of go down the list of all these artists that were popping up at the same time, and to a certain extent, they were all working together, right? Even if they were competitive, they were sort of egging each other on,
right?
And this is what was happening in Renaissance Italy, right? In Renaissance Tuscany. So Da Vinci, for several years of his life, there's no record. That we know that he lived in Milan for a number of years. And while he was living in Milan, and he was working for the Duke of Milan, Sforza, he was commissioned to make this very large horse that was made of bronze. But, in order to fight the French, they had to literally use the bronze from the horse that he'd been working many years to complete. It was a giant horse. To use it for their muskets as their bullets, and so basically, when Milan falls to the French, the King of France, Francis, comes and he sees the fresco of the Last Supper, and when he sees it, he asks also to see and meet with Da Vinci. So Milan became a principality of France at the time, and so the French king asks for Leonardo da Vinci to go back with him to Amboise and spend the last years of his life working with him as sort of like the official painter and artist and architect of the French kingdom. And so Da Vinci does that. Da Vinci goes and he lives there. And it's fascinating because during many points in the life of Da Vinci, there were some sort of mysterious things. I read the book by Walter Isaacson on Da Vinci's life. And I can say that, there were points of time where there was very little written about Da Vinci. Da Vinci went through a very dark period in 1474, 1475. He was accused of sodomy He was widely, known to be homosexual or at least bisexual.
Right.
And he was accused of sodomy with a prominent young man. And at that time, to be accused of that is like a really, really, high crime.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And so because the other young man was from this prominent family, he was able to be released, and they didn't ever pursue further this highly embarrassing public scandal. And so Da Vinci after that went into reclusion for some time. And there are two periods of time where you just don't see much about Da Vinci. It's kind of like 1476, 75, 76, 77, and then again from 1482 until 1486. And there are like whole large blocks of time where Da Vinci's missing. Well, in this book that I have, the Codice Atlantico, there's a reference that's widely believed by scholars to be fictional. Now, Da Vinci was not a novel writer. He didn't write fiction. And if you read his writing, it was always in the context of conveying some knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found yesterday a passage that's quite long, in fact, that chronicles a trip that Da Vinci made to Egypt. That there's no record in the history of Da Vinci's life. He's a very well-known artist. People were always tracking his movements. He was well-known. There was a period of time where he apparently had this experience in a cave. But I have often wondered if Da Vinci spent time in Egypt. And I found the passages where he claims to have been working for the Sultan of Cairo and on a special project. And he actually is traveling through the Taurus mountain range, which is where Mount Arafat is in Turkey. Uh-huh. And there was no record ever of Da Vinci leaving. Now, we know that this was his writing, and why scholars believe this to be, largely fictional or totally fictional is beyond me, candidly. And it doesn't give you the dates either, but it's definitely Da Vinci's writing.
Right.
It's definitely left by Da Vinci. So I would say that, all the polymaths, all the philosophers, and certainly he was very much involved in occult types of things, whether they were related to encryption, cryptography, or other activities. There are many people of that day and age that were kind of a similar mindset. A lot of them were very likely or had either already self-proclaimed members of groups like Rosicrucians or Freemasons or Knights Templar.
Right.
Or suspected to be, right? And so one of the things that, as I was sort of like studying Da Vinci after I came back from Italy in May, is I spent a lot of time in front of the Last Supper, and I came back, and this is kind of a bizarre story because I was drawing a lot of sacred geometry at the time, and I was using a technique that geometers would know, which is called use of the Metatron's cube. The Metatron's cube is something that can be found inside as part and parcel of the flower of life. And what a lot of people don't know is that Metatron's cube can be used to draw each of the Platonic solids in their perfect aspect.
Right.
You can see them show up, and you just use the anchoring points of the Star of David, and then draw the lines to the center of the intersecting lines on the other sort of directly opposed side, right? And so as I did this, I discovered a new type of geometry and a hypercube embedded within Metatron's cube. And so I posted it on Facebook and didn't really think anything of it. And another one of the people that followed me, like immediately, I don't know why he was thinking this, he takes Metatron's cube and the picture that I drew of the hypercube embedded within it, nested within Metatron's cube, and he overlays it on top of the Last Supper. And all of a sudden, where all the lines are intersecting and meeting are places of significance in the painting.
Wow. As
if it was the frame that possibly Da Vinci had used. Now, I would have never seen this. It was someone else who posted it and said, oh, Robert just posted this picture and wow, it like frames perfectly like the windows, the doors, the plate, even
Wow.
the shoulder slope of Jesus in the center of the Last Supper. And it's like, it's bizarre. It's perfect. And so I started thinking more and more about this, and I started hand drawing out the Vitruvian Man as well. I just looked at it and I started drawing it by hand.
Now, for those of you who don't know, the Vitruvian Man is Da Vinci's famous, if you haven't heard it referenced as that, it's the famous picture of the man with, sort of showing arms and legs at different angles. With
right. So
encircled.
it looks like he's got 4 legs and 4 arms, and
right.
He's standing in a square. It's within a square. It's also within a circle.
Yep.
And it's supposed to be something that's pointing to this balance of the square and the circle, which is an ancient problem, right? The mathematicians and philosophers always tried to solve, which was, how do I square a circle when a square is a rational number and a circle is irrational? Is it even possible to do with the compass in a square?
Gotcha.
It's an ancient problem. And so it has been proven, I'm not sure I totally agree with it, but it has been proven to be impossible. Just as, there are, several of these ancient problems that could not be done with compass and square. And all the people that were, especially Rosicrucians or Hermeticists or Freemasons, they do all their work with compass and square. Nothing else. Compass to make circles and a straight edge to make lines.
Yep.
And so I looking at this, I started noticing that the position of the square over the circle wasn't exactly where I thought it should be. Now, I know it looks interesting on the picture because Da Vinci, obviously it's a masterpiece, but why did he place the line of the square to be directly adjacent to and on top of the bottom of the circle where the feet are? Normally, if you're going to square a circle, you would place the square exactly over the center of the circle, and you would center it on top of the circle. And you would have 4 little triangles that would be poking out from the circle. And so there's 2 ways to square a circle, right? One way is to match the area of a circle with the area of a square, right? So they would be totally equal. The other way is to square based on the perimeter. So the perimeter of the square has to be equal to the circumference of the circle. And what Da Vinci had done here is he had done the latter. And so I looked at it, I was like, well, that's really interesting. Why did he move the square down like that? There's so many different ways he could have done this. But then I noticed something very, very interesting. And that is the slope angle of the Great Pyramid. So if there's one number that literally defines the Great Pyramid, determines its volume, determines its height, determines literally everything, its base width, you name it, the volume, everything, it's the slope angle of the Great Pyramid, which is famously 51.8436 degrees. So just remember that number, 51.8436 degrees. So then I was looking at the Vitruvian Man and I thought, you know what, I'm going to measure if the center of this square, right, is at the genitals, and if the center of the circle is at the navel on the Vitruvian Man, I'm going to go from the navel and measure the angle to the upper right side of the square where his hands are pointing. And I measured that angle, and sure enough, it came out to be 51.8436 degrees.
Wow.
And I thought, that cannot be coincidental.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a specific, and anyone in the ancient world who knew, Thales' theorem, and who had known that the pyramid had been measured, knew that it was 51.8436. And so I'm thinking, well, did Da Vinci move the square down on the circle to encrypt within this connection to the Great Pyramid?
Yeah.
Which has been enigmatic for thousands of years. And let's not forget that the Great Pyramid is, probably the oldest, largest standing building on the planet today. that is of any significant height.
Yeah.
Right. And for over 4,000 years, it was the tallest building in the world.
Yeah.
So think about that for a moment. I mean, every few years, there's a new building that goes up, Burj Khalifa, one in Singapore, one in Malaysia. There's now one going up in Shanghai that will end up being the tallest building in the world. And so the supremacy of the tallest building in the world is a changing constant, right? It's constantly in flux because there's a new building going up that, this is not going to be. At one point, the Empire State Building was the tallest building. And yet, for 4,000 years, the Great Pyramid stood as the tallest building in the world.
Right.
And of course, people would ask, how the heck did they do that? So 4,000 years. So I started drawing more, and I called up my friend Alan Green, who's a very well-known cryptographer. And he is the one who found the Shakespeare encryption. Shakespeare left a code embedded in his sonnets as well as his plays that you can find on YouTube. It's amazing stuff, truly amazing stuff. And you'll find that Shakespeare left behind knowledge, not only of the Great Pyramid, he encoded the math constants that went into the building of the Great Pyramid, which include all the math constants that we know today, and then some.
Wow.
And these include pi, not only pi and phi, the golden number, but also the Euler number, which is used in calculating compound interest growth. Also, Brun's constant that was only discovered in the 20th century.
Wow.
Just by taking the proportional dimensions of the Great Pyramid, dividing them into the other proportional dimensions of the Great Pyramid. So it'd be like side divided by height, right? Side width divided by the height, half the height, and or half the side, right? To create a Pythagorean, theorem, right? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So he found all of this, no less than 12 of the math constants that are most fundamental in our understanding of mathematics today, some of which have never even been discovered, much less 100 years ago compared to 4,000 years ago, and found them all embedded on the cover of the sonnets by William Shakespeare. So I thought, hey, if he could find this, and it's really a compelling piece of work, if he could find this, then he'll be able to help, take this to another level for the mathematical rigor required to see if Da Vinci's leaving us something here.
Right.
And it's interesting because the other part of it too on Shakespeare was that not only did the cover of the sonnets give us all of the math constants, 12 fundamental math constants, but also it actually gives us the geodesic coordinates. So the degrees north and degrees east, right? Which are well known today. And by the way, if you haven't looked at this before, the degrees for the latitude for the Great Pyramid's location is 29.97920, 458 degrees. That happens to be exactly the speed of light down to 1 meter per second.
Wow.
So the speed of light in meters per second is 299,792.458 meters.
Wow.
Per second. So, and not only that, but the longitude is also a light speed measurement. It relates to two math constants. It's Euler divided by pi, and it's light speed minus the 1 in front, only this time not in meters, but in miles. Now, go figure that one. That's a brain teaser. Right?
Yeah.
How does that work? 31.1342 degrees. And go put that up against 360 degrees, and you're going to get the same as the diameter of the sun in miles.
Jeez.
Okay, so there's something going on here, right, with Egypt and the pyramid in particular, and Shakespeare is trying to tell us. So I had Alan use his very, very precise and brilliant mathematical mind to look to see if Da Vinci left us anything. And so we made this great film that now has gotten several hundred thousands of views, and it's basically titled "The Real Da Vinci Code." And what we believe is that if you place the pyramid on top of the Vitruvian Man, exactly in the right location, where the genitals are at the subterranean chamber, the ground level is exactly where the navel is. The next level up is 1/14 up, and the whole thing is defined by 14ths, the Vitruvian Man. And this relates back to the story of Set murdering Osiris and cutting him into 14 pieces.
Ah.
Right? The waxing and waning moon, and how Isis brings Osiris back to life, right?
Yeah.
And basically these 14 pieces put the man back together. So Da Vinci is writing, if you look at the writing on top and on the bottom of the Vitruvian Man, you'll see that he's basically giving proportional references all based in mirrored backwards handwriting, because that's the way Da Vinci wrote.
Wow.
Mirrored backwards handwriting. And so you'll see 1/14 is the only numerical reference that you're going to find on the page.
Wow.
Right? It's written as numbers. So it is fascinating, because once you place the pyramid on top of it, then you'll see that Da Vinci had written into the Vitruvian Man both horizontal and vertical lines. And each of the horizontal lines that are in the place of the pyramid are corresponding directly, not imprecisely, but I mean perfectly, to the ground floor level of the subterranean chamber, the Queen's chamber, and the King's chamber. And because there are more lines drawn in the Vitruvian Man, both at the neck and at the between the brows and at the crown of the head, we believe that there are at least 3 other chambers that have yet to be discovered.
Wow.
And that Da Vinci actually left for us the location of these chambers. One, so the current root chakra is where the genitals are. Then you've got a sacral, right, which is where the navel is. Mm-hmm. And each of these chambers represents chakras within this, man.
Wow.
Who is, maybe Da Vinci's trying to tell us something more about, the ascension of man or the evolution of mankind.
Wow.
And that the King's chamber is the heart chakra, which then means that there must be a throat chakra where the other lines are. So then that also gives some other questions to us of how do we get in there, right? And are the vertical lines on the arms that are meeting up with the edge of the pyramid on its side another entry point to the outside? So this is one of the things that we're very excited about. It's it's kind of a hobby for us, but it's a very serious hobby because we spend a lot of time working on it. And I was really blown away when I was told that several members of the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities had watched the film and that they really loved it.
Wow.
Now, I only learned that there was actually a school called the Da Vinci School of Institute of Art and Sciences that was in Cairo all the way through World War II. And remember that Italy was a supporter of Hitler in a way, because they had an alliance between Hitler and Mussolini, right? Mm-hmm. And so they had this school going. It was a very, very sort of esoteric and quiet, and nobody, you couldn't apply to it. You had to only be invited to be a member of it, going on in Cairo on Da Vinci. So that's another interesting little factoid. So the fact that I just found only just yesterday the references that Da Vinci made to his trip to Egypt.
Wow.
And I have no reason to believe that it was fictional, because none of his other writing is fictional. And I think there's something profound here. And I think that possibly Da Vinci is telling us something, that the pyramid is something more significant than what we have heretofore thought that it was, as a burial chamber. I don't think it's a burial chamber at all. They've never found a mummy in any of the pyramids.
Right.
And I think that, I personally have spent the night in the Great Pyramid now 3 times. One time I did it totally by myself. I'm going to be doing it again in a few months. And I can tell you that it's a profound experience. And if anyone ever gets the opportunity to do it, I highly recommend it.
Right. If I recall, when we spoke before, you had a pretty powerful experience one of the times you stayed in the pyramid as well, with the discovery of something that you found.
Yeah, I think it's, it's interesting. I went there in 2018, and I just had a feeling. I was going with a bunch of my friends to Israel. I went to Israel for a week, and then I took about 12 of my friends to go to Egypt with me as well. And our group was larger in Israel. Not everybody came to Egypt. There was about 12 of us that made the trek over. And the entire week I was in Israel before that, I went to some really cool places. I went underneath the original Temple of Solomon. I snuck deep into the caves of Zedekiah, which are the caves that are referred to often as Solomon's Quarry. This is where the stone was quarried to build Solomon's temple. And it's a very deep labyrinth of caves that goes on the Jordanian side of Jerusalem under the Temple Mount. So this today is going to be directly underneath what's referred to and known as the Dome of the Rock, or the mosque that has been built there on the Temple Mount, on Mount Moriah. And so I went deep into this tunnel, and I was trying to find, potentially, because this is supposedly the caves that Zedekiah had the Ark of the Covenant hidden in when King Nebuchadnezzar sacked Jerusalem about 600 BC. And so I thought, well, geez, maybe I'll find where the Ark was supposedly hidden. I knew that the Ark was no longer there, but I did find a place that was very bizarre, and I have actually on videotape. I found a place with a very large A that was etched into the floor, letter A. Which is a very ancient symbol used by Egyptians, Phoenicians. It's not hieroglyphics, but it's definitely probably from some proto-language even that predates all those languages.
Yeah.
But I found a letter A, and right next to it was this mound that looked as though it had turned from limestone to quartz crystal. And I got all that on video, and next time I see you, I'll show it to you. But it was really quite an experience. So, but while I was there, I kept drawing in my notebooks this different representations using geometric approaches to drawing an alpha and omega. And it was just in my consciousness. It just would not go out. It was there, and it wasn't going to go anywhere. Yeah. And I kept drawing it, even down to the point where I got on the plane in Jerusalem to fly to Egypt, to Cairo. On the flight over, I was drawing the alpha omega again. And when we got to the pyramids that afternoon, so we did a little didactic session, and we were going to spend the night in the pyramid that night. So we went to the Giza Plateau, did all of our sightseeing type stuff. On the outside, went to the Sphinx and did all that stuff. And then that night, we went into the Great Pyramid. The pyramid's closed, and I had special access. So we went in at about 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock. And so we're in the King's Chamber. First, we went into the subterranean chamber, then we went into the Queen's Chamber. And I'd been in there before, so it wasn't totally new experience for me, but it was for my friends. And so, a few of them wanted to lay in the sarcophagus and see what it's like and everything. And there's very little lighting inside the King's Chamber. And this room is built perfectly according to golden ratio mathematics. It's basically a vesica piscis, which is two circles overlapping, and the rectangle that's a 20 by 10 cubit rectangle of a room. Uh-huh. And it just so happens also that I had measured the prior time I'd gone the room for its volume compared to its. I measured the room for its volume compared to the sarcophagus's volume, and found that the ratio turns out to be exactly the golden angle and the fine structure constant, which is the math constant that defines. It's referred to as alpha, and it's the math constant that defines the separation between light and darkness. So an electron either emits a photon or it absorbs it, and the threshold energy with which it does it is right at 0.007299. And many movies have been made about this. In fact, when the Voyager spacecraft went up, and Carl Sagan was responsible for that program, he wanted to make sure that if some alien life were to come across Voyager, that in order to communicate that we are a sentient and intelligent species, that we should put on there not our knowledge of pi, but rather our knowledge of alpha, the fine structure constant, because that says that we have a deeper knowledge, a more significant knowledge of the cosmos and how physics actually works. So we thought that would be like the most important of all math constants to show. And it's also the most enigmatic. So basically, while we're in there, and one of my friends is laying in the sarcophagus, I look down on the rim of the sarcophagus and I notice an alpha and omega.
Wow.
Like debossed right under the rim. And I'm like, I have read everything possible about the pyramids. And I know that they've never found any writing whatsoever.
It was like it was like scratched into it, essentially.
It's not scratched, it's debossed.
Wow.
Like it's like you'll see it. It looks really old. And I hope that maybe you can get some photographs to be able to show, or somehow, some way. I don't know, maybe we'll have to do this on a television thing. But
yeah,
basically, it's got patina on it, and it's a perfect alpha and omega that you can only see in certain light, but it's definitely there. Now, teams of archaeologists have since gone and seen it. There's nothing been written about it ever. And I took measurements of it, very detailed measurements, in fact, and found that, first of all, the room of the king's chamber happens to be, people don't think that the meter existed at that time, okay? The pyramid was built on sacred cubit, which is 1.718 feet. That also happens to be a very important math constant, 1 minus less than a very important math constant, which is the one that defines compound interest growth, which is the Euler number, 2.718. Right. And Euler is interesting. A way to remember this is that Euler, or Euler, is the word for owl in German. And an owl can turn its head 270 degrees. And 2.7 is approximately the Euler number.
Wow.
Right? So basically, while we're in there, I noticed this, and I start measuring it, and I find that the sarcophagus is 89.62 inches long, and exactly at the 33rd inch is the alpha, the peak of the A, right? Which happens to be 0.39 of the length of the sarcophagus, and if I add 1 to that and then take the reciprocal value, 1 over 1.39 equals 2.718, which is the Euler number. So it's embedding the math constants. The width of the omega is 1.86 inches. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. They didn't use the inch. They didn't use the foot. They used the sacred cubit, and that's right. But let me give you some perspective on this. So the sacred cubit and the meter and the foot are all relational to each other. And this we know as a fact. Here's how. So if you take a circle with a radius of 1 meter, and you take 1/12 of the circle, like cut it into 12 pieces of pizza, right? And you take 1/12 of that. And the arc of 1/12 of that circle, if it has a radius of 1 meter, will be exactly 1 sacred Egyptian cubit, 1.718 feet. And it will take a plumb bob, which is a pendulum, exactly in time 1 second, like an atomic clock reading, 1 second to traverse that arc of 30 degrees, of 1.718 feet. So it's literally relational to the meter. And if you add together the Euler number plus the meter, you end up with 5 feet exactly, down to the accuracy of 1 human blood cell. So 1/50,000th of a foot. Wow. That's the degree of accuracy that it is. And then the 1 would be the foot. And so now you add the foot plus the Euler number, right? which Euler minus 1, 1.718, plus 3.281, which is the number of feet in a meter, you end up with exactly 6 feet. And this is, very, very important to understand, because once you get that the pyramid has all these mathematical ratios built within it that are so super advanced, and that those 2 letters of alpha and omega embed the exact same math. I mean, down to the fact that the width of the king's chamber is 20 cubits, right? And it has the width is 10 cubits and the length is 20 cubits, so 10 by 20. The perimeter of the king's chamber then would be 60 cubits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, 60 cubits happens to be exactly 31.4159 meters. Now, what is 314,159? That's pi.
Wow.
It's perfect. Now, interestingly, from the edge of the sarcophagus to the center of this alpha omega that's left, on the rim of the sarcophagus, is exactly 31.14159 inches. So right to the center of the alpha omega from the edge is the same as the perimeter in meters. That's kind of mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
And the width of the alpha omega is 5.6 inches, which 5.6 squared equals 31.4159. So they're related. So 5.6 inches is the width of the alpha omega. You square it, and it gives you the length to the edge from the center. Wow. And again, 5 and 6 is relational in that room, because the sarcophagus can be stacked on its side 6 times to the ceiling and 5 times from wall to wall. And then it goes in 137.5 total times, which is this, relational to the fine structure constant and the golden angle. So this is like, immediately I was thinking, well, maybe this is some graffiti or something, right? Mm-hmm. But with all of this math, and it's so perfectly done, it's not like it was scratched in there. It would take 25 tons of pressure to deboss diorite, rose granite, that's the surface of the sarcophagus.
Yeah.
I fundamentally believe that this was something very ancient.
Yeah.
And we found one other marking on the side as well, which was a compass and a circle.
Wow.
Now, what is this telling us? I don't know what it's telling us, but I got to tell you, it is remarkable that it had not been seen by thousands and thousands of visitors, including the Egyptologists and hieroglyphics experts.
Yeah.
And they came next to me and they stood next to me. They're like, "Did you do that?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I just chipped it out just now." By the way, diorite is one of the hardest stones.
Right.
So if you tried to chip something out of it, the whole thing will just crack.
Yeah.
It's super brittle. And so I kind of joked. I said, "No, come on, guys. I didn't. You guys frisked me before I came in." And this is so mathematically perfect. It's got an old patina on it. It's remarkable. And I think there's something more with the pyramid. And I think that Da Vinci was trying to lead us towards it.
Yeah.
Maybe the pyramid's a reflection of consciousness.
Yeah, that's where I was about to go. What as we sort of wind down here, all of these reflections and mathematical tie-ins that you are obviously observing on a super high level. Is that where you think it's all leading?
I think it comes back to where we started our conversation. That the grand journey for our experience as human beings is not to go and search the cosmos, it's to search ourselves. And I believe that as we open up new avenues of ourselves, as we explore into the realm of the self, that the universe unlocks its mysteries to us. And I believe that the pyramid might just be a reflection of our status and progress towards that end. And as we open new chambers within ourselves, maybe new chambers within the pyramid will also be open.
That makes a whole lot of sense to me. It is, I feel like, Robert, we could probably go, we didn't even get too much onto the whole prime numbers thing and encryption and that, I don't know if there's anything that you want to share that is somewhat, doesn't take a very lengthy explanation, because I know we're running a little bit short on time, but, perhaps we do another episode because that is a whole nother thing, right?
The only thing I would say is that, we complicate life so much. We all do.
Yeah.
I think we're here to have fun.
I agree.
We're here to actually enjoy ourselves. I look at suicide rates right now. They are at historically high levels. And the amount of self-loathing the world is suffering from is unprecedented today.
Yeah.
And I just I think we're too hard on ourselves. And I think that the reason why we're too hard on ourselves is because we're hard on everyone else around us too.
Yeah.
And every time we make a judgment of someone else, we're really just making our own shadows more and more dense, the part that we need to integrate and to merge with.
Yeah.
It becomes more and more challenging. And let's just leave the baggage on the side of the road. It reminds me, I remember when I worked for one of these companies in the Bay Area, and I was the head of the European operation. And the CEO was kind of a mentor to me.
Uh-huh.
He was French, and I remember thinking at that time, that I wasn't moving up in my career fast enough.
Yeah, right.
Which, obviously, that probably, as I look back now, I think, what a stupid, foolish thing to think, right?
Right.
And nor would I even care about it now. But so I would go to him periodically and say, okay, what do I need to do to be able to get more span of experience and control and whatever, to self-actualize in my career. And he said something to me I'll never forget. He says, Robert, he's French. He's a French actor. It is as if I lived in France too, so
you're pretty good. I'm hearing that.
It is as if you're walking down the highway on a long desert road. It's very hot outside, more than 100 degrees. You are carrying very heavy luggage. You're carrying it for more than 10 miles, trying to find somewhere to hitch a ride. He says, why don't you drop the baggage? It's very heavy. You don't need it. Leave it on the side of the road. And I never really got the full meaning of that until many, many years later. You can skip rungs of the ladder of life because you have great quality of experience and you can move up quickly and you can do all kinds of cool stuff. And I was very lucky and blessed in my career in life to be able to do lots of fun stuff. But the moment that I let go of my expectations and decided that, you know what, if I died today, it'd be okay. I've had a great life. I would never voluntarily want to end my life, but I've had a fantastic life on every level. I look back on it, even the most difficult of times, with such fondness and joy, candidly. And the moment I decided that it'd be okay if I died, and if I didn't self-actualize all the things that I wanted in my career or all the things I wanted to achieve in life or whatever, that would be just fine, then my life took a whole different turn. And I allowed myself to just sort of surrender and let the universe do its thing. And that opened all the doorways. And it wasn't easy. And I'm still not done. None of us are. That's the other joke here, is it will never be done.
Right.
We will never be done. It's not like all of a sudden, oh man, I can't wait till, I sell my company, get a bunch of money, then I'm going to relax. It's not like that with evolution, right, of the species.
Right.
It's not like that at all. It
or
will
the
just
evolution of the soul.
Right. It'll just continue to go to the next challenge, the next level.
Yep.
But we will certainly transcend certain challenges that we had faced that may have been the things that we were facing on a day-to-day basis, survival, right? Very 3D kinds of concepts. And hopefully at some point we can transcend those things And the doorway to that transcendence, I'm 100% convinced, is learning not to judge others or yourself. Judge not, lest ye judge yourself.
Yes.
And secondly, to love everybody else as if they were yourself.
Right.
Those are the only two things that really matter. Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. And once you realize that everybody else is a mirror reflection, because of the prism that you see the world through is a mirror reflection of your own subconscious, then you realize there's no separation between you and them.
Yep.
And that is a major mindset shift that can have very profound impact on your life. And that's a very simple prescription for that feeling of transcendence and meaning and purpose. It is a very simple thing. It sounds simple, and it actually is simple, but to actually do it in practice is the hardest thing you'll ever do.
Right.
And it requires you to know yourself as well. Now, Socrates said, know thyself. Two simple words that very few people ever master.
Yeah.
And I really, more than the math, more than anything else, I could talk to you about all kinds of math discoveries and everything, and it'll just make your head spin. And it's not going to make you'll go, wow, that sounds really cool. And what does that mean potentially for the world in this, sort of next phase that we're entering into? And I'm super excited about 2020. I do find it interesting that the world is changing and shifting so rapidly right now.
Yeah.
And 2020 is the words that we use to describe vision, right?
Yep.
I have a feeling that there will be eyes opening.
More symbolism encoded, right? In the math, yet again.
So with that, I think we could probably go ahead and end it there. But I really appreciate you taking the time with me.
Absolutely.
And I'd be happy to do it again with you at some other point in time. But I think the major messages that I hope to get across have been conveyed today.
Yeah, I think of on the day that we're here recording, it was announced that Ram Dass passed, and he said, treat everyone you meet like God and drag. And he definitely was pointing the way to this idea that, it's all reflections of the same thing, as you're saying here. It always is coming back to the same, it's the answers are sort of hiding in clear sight with, at least if we have someone like yourself to sort of do a little scratching around on behalf of humanity. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and I know everyone out there listening does as well. What is the best way for people who want to continue to follow your work to do so?
Well, first of all, Instagram or on Facebook, you can find me at Robert Edward Grant. And I do respond to comments and everything that come up on there and questions, and we're pretty prolific in how much we post on there. Sometimes I'll have a discovery in math or physics, and we'll post it within 10 minutes of discovery. So There's no holding back here. It's not like,
beautiful.
oh my gosh, how do I make money off this? It's not.
Right.
And the other way is that I do have courses. And the courses are hosted on the Resonance Science Foundation, Resonance Academy. And the name of the course is The Etymology of Number, is the first beginner's course. And then there's an advanced course called The Language of Light. These courses are intended for anyone who is curious to understand mathematics as a language. And one thing I do promise is that if you take this course, that your whole perception of mathematics, even if it was very intimidating to you in school, will change dramatically, because you'll start seeing it as a language whose voice is music.
Wow.
And then the other thing is, you can always visit my website. You can read my papers there, which is robertedwardgrant.com. And also, I just published a book of my artwork, which I'm happy to say is selling very well. And that's available also in the shop on robertedwardgrant.com. And I never did any of this stuff to try to make money and stuff. In fact, I was reticent to publish any books or anything because I just didn't feel like that's where this was going to go. But so many people kept asking me to publish a book of the artwork, and I am going to be also making an ebook version available in January. Mm-hmm. So for people that would like an ebook version, instead of a hardback version, it's a lot less expensive as well. We'll be making that available in January. And that book is called The Mirror of Consciousness.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. Robert, thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom and insights today. I do have one final question for you that is my sort of go-to outro question. And I feel like you've answered it in some regards, but let's hear it summarized here in 60 seconds or less, if you would. What is the meaning of life, according to Robert Grant?
Oh, boy.
Little cliche for you.
Very simple, and I'll say it in 4 words. Know thyself, love thyself.
Yes. And so it is. Thank you, Robert, for shining that light and continuing to lead more and more people to an understanding of who and what they are through the incredible work you're doing. All of you out there listening, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, journey well. Love you all so, so much.
Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day.
And if you're feeling the call to come for a week retreat-style Mystic Manor immersion, remember to go now and book your time to speak with me directly about stepping into the optimistic vortex at calendly.com/talk with Brandon while there are still spots left. Otherwise, I look forward to co-creating magic with you at the Mystic Manor.